Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Even Better podcast. This is part of our ongoing mission here at Your Clear Next Step to help us all have even better workdays so that we can co-create better communities. And I am delighted to welcome here as our guest, Scott Helmers. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for asking.
This is such a joy. If you do not know Scott Helmers, then you are not in the right circles, and it is time to expand your circles because, man, Scott is in so many different places. Your worlds have to just collide somewhere along the line, whether it is in business analysis or whether it is in musical theater or whether it is in any of the many places where Scott Helmers finds himself. I have just delighted over the years in getting to know Scott. We've wound up being at tables together because we have spoken at events in the business analysis space and found ourselves in just enjoying many, many conversations together.
Yeah,
he is
absolutely.
Yeah, it has been a joy. So in business analysis spaces, he is a business process consultant, an app designer. He's a trainer with the Harvard Computing Group. He is the co-inventor of TaskMap. He does all kinds of things. And, if I read his bio and share with you the technical stuff that he does, you might have the impression that I may have first mistakenly had about him, which is that he can geek out on some geek outy stuff, which is actually partly true, that he can geek out on some of the geeky stuff. But he is also so delightfully rich with these wonderful stories of human connection and the surprising things about his musical endeavors that I did not know, and his theater connections that I've discovered over these last couple of years as well. I mean, and plus he's on his bicycle all over the place, and he's just everywhere. Where are you not, Scott?
You're making me out to be a difficult act to follow. So here I have to follow myself, and that's going to be a challenge. But we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Oh, Scott, it is a joy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Okay. Well, let's see. The story that I'm sort of weaving through today is indeed about musical theater and ways in which I've had the pleasure and even the thrill of being part of musical theater productions in the local amateur community here in the Boston area. And a big part of why it's became so special very quickly is because it centers around my two daughters and something we share. And I did some musical theater as a kid, and it was specifically because my family moved from Ohio at the end of my 7th grade year and moved to a new town in Connecticut at the beginning of that summer. And my parents had discovered there was one of those classic 4-week musical theater miracle programs. You get a bunch of kids together, you give them a script and a score, and you train them to be actors. And 4 weeks later, it's often a production only parents can love, but it's a production. So it turned out that, they said, hey, we found this thing, and would it make sense to be part of it, meet some kids that way? And I thought, sure, why not? I'd always been a trombone player, was for many years and still am. But I thought, well, theater, why not? And sure enough, I only lived in that town for 3 years, but I managed to do 4 productions. So it was the summers after 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, moved after that to another town. But those 4 productions were the basis for, in fact, the very first one was the basis for most of the friends I had in that town for the 3 years I lived there.
Yeah. So musical theater, I remember doing a production in 5th and 6th productions in 5th and 6th grade with a musical theater group in children's theater in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and forming friendships there that I've got at least one of those friends that I still have and influences on my life today that from the productions that I was in then that are, those friendships form forever, don't they?
Absolutely true. And the same thing happens with sports teams to some extent, and to other kinds of gatherings. But I just find there's an intimacy about performing together that in the dark or in dimly lit spaces or what that is unique in a lot of ways. And I didn't appreciate it as much then. I've come to appreciate it a lot more. So the resurgence, the second wave of theater for me was directly due to my daughters. It was roughly 2000, 2001, something like that. They were 7 and 11, or roughly so, and saw a production or an audition for a local production of The Music Man. So there's an Iowa kind of special music. Yeah. Anyway, I won't sing for you, but there's that show was important to me because it happened, of the 4 shows I did in Connecticut many years earlier, that was the last one. And so decades later, they thought, oh, why don't we, can you take us to audition for this show? And I took them rather than my wife, because I've always harbored this idea that maybe I would try this again someday. So I went to the audition. They both auditioned. And then the director, I don't know her, she doesn't know me, but she looks across the room at me. And I very quickly learned the fundamental truth of community theater, which is there are never enough men. Because she looks at this stranger across the room and she says, "You're auditioning too, right?" Well, I did. And as it happens, the song, "There Were Bells on the Hill, but I Never Heard Them Ringing" from Music Man, that happened to be the lullaby I sang to the girls when they were young. So I said, well, I can sing that. She said, okay. I did sing it. She said, can you sing with someone else? And I said, well, I guess so. And so she had me sing the duet. Another song is a duet. And I ended up cast in the Barbershop Quartet. And it was a revelation in so many ways. I'd never sung barbershop. In fact, I hadn't sung in front of an audience since probably junior high school, or maybe high school. But it was really something. I learned, among other things, that all of the musical skills I developed as a trombone player, especially playing in small ensembles, a quintet, a quartet setting, it's all directly analogous. It's all about listening more so than playing. It's at least 60% listen and 40% play. And that same thing is true in barbershop singing. The same thing is true at work too, but there's a certain amount of that 60% listen, 40% talk that applies in a lot of meetings, or should.
Absolutely. So this is it, right? This is our segue. This is why, for those of you who stopped and went, okay, but I'm not in musical theater, and I don't play the trombone, and I don't sing in barbershop quartets, and I don't sing in public or even in the shower. That's okay, because what we're going to talk about here, and the title of this podcast is 5 things that were learned during musical theater still apply at work. So these are 5 things, Scott, that you learned doing musical theater that apply
Right.
at work. And so we're going to talk through these 5 things in particular, and they're lessons that you've learned doing musical theater, but you've had this really robust career at work in a variety of different workplace settings, and you've been able to draw these parallels, draw these connections, and you're going to take us through these. So let's dive in. Let's get there. So that first one, we're on it right there. It's all about the ensemble. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it truly is. Most things in theater, and many, if not most things at work, are about the ensemble. In a show, there's always a lead or 2 or 3. At work, there often is a superstar or 2 or 3. But it's really the ensemble that makes or breaks the whole gig. It's the fact that there is a crowd behind that lead or that superstar that does certain things and needs to do them in an appropriate way, in a right way, in order to make the star shine even brighter and to make the overall production a success, or the overall project or work effort a success. And another part of that is that when you're performing with a group of people, you don't all act the same way. You don't all sing the same way. You have different temperaments, different styles, different approaches to how you want to do something. Does that sound like work? Yeah, it sounds a lot like every place I've ever worked. So a big part of being in the ensemble is appreciating those differences and being able to reconcile that maybe I need to do this a little differently, or maybe I can help guide somebody to do their thing a little bit differently so that we produce a better result.
I think there's something really, really important here in what you just said, and that I want to call out. It is both the differences and the value. So we are different, and those stars, the ones that wind up in front or wind up with the bigger microphones or the louder voices, or that seem to steal the show, many of them cannot do what they do without the supporting roles. They simply
true.
cannot. If the supporting roles are not there, if those supporting roles suddenly decided we're not valuable enough, or we're not going to play today, or we're not feeling it today, we're not going to show up, those stars, they would fall apart. I mean, they
Hmm.
can't do what they do without, it
Right.
does take the whole ensemble. We need all of us showing up all the time.
Absolutely true. And we're all familiar with the Tony Awards and the Oscars and whatnot that tend to reward individuals. But what's really fascinating is that Broadway actors and actresses hold a ceremony every year to honor the ensembles
Mm.
of in front of whom they perform. And it's so critical. They really understand. They appreciate exactly what you just said.
Lovely. Okay, so you've got another point that's also, so we are different and we all have a role to play, and that's going to segue into this next one. You've put it very well here. Don't be the director if you're not the director.
Yeah,
Take that apart for us.
well, I think we've all been in situations like that where there's somebody who's trying to take control that really doesn't have the wherewithal to be in control or shouldn't be in control. Or maybe they even do have the wherewithal. Maybe they'd even be better at it. But in this particular situation, they're not the director. So it's a balance. And again, it's part of our individual learning journey is that we have to appreciate that sometimes we aren't the person who should be in charge. There's someone else who has that role at the moment. And in one particular local theater company, it happens to be the first big one with in which my daughters and I performed. The director of this company still is the director, and the company's been running for 30 years or so at this point. But I'll be polite when I say this. He's one of the biggest jerks I've ever had any occasion to work with. And I'm truly being polite. I usually describe him in quite different terms, but it's the funniest thing is that he is the director and he brooks no intervention. And if you have a suggestion, there might be a way to introduce it, but you really kind of have to introduce it indirectly. It may be that you know a close ally of his and you can suggest it to the ally because you know that that person's opinion will carry some weight and might be able to influence the actual director. But stepping up and trying to exert any measure of control with that person in particular was a total, not only a waste of effort, but you would be berated publicly for doing so. And that's not a good feeling.
No. Oh, so understanding our roles, we could probably unpack that in a couple of different ways,
Mm,
right? There are probably some things we could do there. One of the things we're working on in our Changemakers curriculum is helping people really understand how to operate within the constructs of the organization in which they belong,
yeah.
right? And so you have to do what's best for the organization, and to your point of, if you have something that really is best for that organization and you can't influence directly up, you may have to influence sideways because there may be
Mhm.
someone else who
Right.
can influence up, and or you may have to realize that now this is a good idea whose time has not yet come. We'll have
Mhm.
to wait, and if that's the better choice, then we have to do that. But learning to make that authentic human connection and understand that I can't influence here. This is not the space. Alternatively, as humans, if we are in that director role, learning to understand that, okay, we are in that director role. Is there a different way to demonstrate our directorship? Is there
Yeah,
a different way to lead?
right. Can I be the director without being a jerk, first of
Right.
all? Can I be the director and accept input willingly, even gratefully, and allow that to either change what I'm doing or not, but at least gracefully accept the input, the comments, the suggestions.
Yep.
I strive to be that person, and
Right.
you do too, and many of us do.
Yep. I would hope that is something we're aspiring to, for
Yeah,
sure.
but another side of that is that there are many reasons why there is only one director in a lot of situations.
Yep.
That oftentimes there should only be one.
Right. So another circumstance in which that clarity of role becomes really important. I've got a gal that I work with closely who is in emergency response management. And
Hmm.
in emergency response, clarity of role is critical. And there can be only one director. There can
Right.
be only one person in charge in emergency response, because clarity of who is giving the direction in that space becomes really, really important in life, a matter of life or death. Right. And then so we need clear response and clear direction. And so if you are the director, in that case, don't muddy the waters, and clear direction needs to come. But understanding those dynamics and understanding that role structure is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Don't be the director if you're not the director. For sure. Okay, so let's move on to the third one, and I'll recap for those who are just joining in. If you're just joining in, it's time to pause for a second and go back, because we are visiting here with Scott Helmers, and we are talking about 5 things he learned doing musical theater that apply to work. We started with the truth that it's all about the ensemble, and moved to don't be the director if you're not the director. And we're picking up with the third one here. The 30-foot rule applies to more than set design. Okay, you're gonna have to catch us up for those of us who are not familiar with that. Give us some context here.
Absolutely. So when you're building sets for theater, there is something that's colloquially referred to as the 30-foot rule. If you can't see it from more than 30 feet away, it doesn't matter. Now, many of us have a streak of perfectionism built in. We struggle to learn that good enough is, in fact, good enough. Perfect isn't always required. I see you. Yeah,
I don't know of what you speak.
Yeah, you don't know anyone like that. You don't know how that's possible. Well,
No.
so building sets is an interesting thing, because you need to make them look like the real thing, whatever the real thing is, but they don't have to be perfect. One of the things when I first got involved in 20 years ago and started doing offstage things, helping to run a theater company and helping to recruit a production team for an upcoming show, one of the things you think is, oh, that kid's father is a carpenter, so he'd be great to help us build sets, right? Well, maybe, but maybe not, because a guy who is a professional carpenter or a woman who builds houses for a living wants to build a house you can live in. But you know what? A theater set, you don't have to live in it. You have to live in front of it. It doesn't have to survive a hurricane or a tornado. We're not in Kansas anymore. So you have to get those people to dial back and say, you know what? 30-foot rule, folks. If you can't see it for more than 30 feet, it doesn't matter. So the fact that the seams don't actually align precisely between 2 pieces of wall section, or the fact that a set piece, a piece of furniture that's in front of the set doesn't line up quite the way you'd want it in your house, it doesn't matter.
Wow. Okay, so this is another place, just a wonderful place to stop and think about the alignment between role responsibility and human nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure you've got the right person aligned with the right task, because that perfectionist or that aspiring perfectionist is not the right alignment with that role, as you've correctly identified there. And now, okay, so let's take that to a business context. Let's take that to a workplace context where there are places in which perfectionism is absolutely necessary. And then in those cases, we want that perfectionist or aspiring perfectionist to be really, really close to the work that has to be as perfect as possible. So if we're working on microplastics that are going to be life-saving devices and the data needs to prove that they are such, that is a different level of perfectionism than if we are wrapping paper napkins at a barbecue.
Right.
Where the paper napkins are going to get thrown away and we're going to wipe barbecue sauce off our faces. It's just a different level of perfectionism.
Yeah. And it's not that you have to choose different people in all cases. It's, if the role doesn't require perfection, it's a case of helping, as I suggested a moment ago, helping that professional or that perfectionist to just dial back and learn to be willing to do good enough work. It doesn't have to be perfect. And that's a hard lesson for some of us. I absolutely struggle with that.
And we may have to give them more grace.
Mm-hmm.
We may have to help them if they've not done that before. We may have to help them in a new way. And if that's counter to their grain and they're resisting that or fighting that or showing up in an unusual way in the conversation, we may have to remind them that, hey, remember we talked about this. This doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. And the opposite is true to a certain extent too. If I'm working with that aspiring perfectionist, I may need to adjust my expectations a little bit and allow them to be a bit more close to perfect than I think is really necessary for the task, but helps them fulfill what they need internally to complete the job.
Mm. Yeah. Because we may wind up with something really beautiful.
True. Something unexpectedly beautiful. I happen to be reading a book at the moment about serendipity. It's called the Serendipity Mindset. And the premise of the book is that serendipity is more than luck. It's about being in a state of mind in which we can accept the unexpected and even expect the unexpected and be able to connect dots between where we are and what this unexpected thing that happens and make something from it. And I love the idea. I jumped to get a copy of the book when I read a review of it in the Boston Globe a couple of weeks ago. And I'm only about a third of the way in, but it's kind of fascinating.
It sounds delightful. Serendipity mindset.
Yes.
Sounds delightful. And that's going to be a nice segue into this fourth thing that you've learned by doing musical theater that also shows up at work. So it's critical to be present.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely true in so many circumstances. When you're on stage and you're not a member of the ensemble, maybe you're a lead or a secondary lead or whatever, and you have a moment where you're literally in the spotlight, it's easy to be present. In fact, it's difficult not to be. And if you're not, boy, does it show up because you are truly in the spotlight. But I find is a real challenge for me on stage is when I don't have anything to do, I'm not in the spotlight. How do I remain focused on being part of the ensemble in a way that doesn't distract? There's the phrase stealing focus that we talk about in theater. So you don't want to steal focus from whomever should have it, right? So being part of the ensemble and just having truly nothing to do, but remaining present, remaining in the scene and contributing to it is an interesting challenge.
Sure. Here, as we record this, it's the Advent season, right? It's the Christmas season. There have been a couple of opportunities to watch this, and one is the Christmas programs, the children's programs that are all over the place right now, and one was the delightful example with, I don't know, 30 or 40 kids up in front of the congregation, and one of the little girls, you can see there's a lot going on, but she is not the center of the action, but she becomes the center of focus because she's looking in the audience for her parents.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't see her parents and she's sad. And then she finds her parents and her whole face lights up
Yes.
right as she recognizes that she has found who she's looking for, right? And so it's a moment where it steals the focus, right? But it's endearing and it's adorable because she's the kid,
right.
And everybody laughs and everybody smiles and everybody's delighted in the moment. But you wonder, okay, are there moments where my joy and my connections and my moments are stealing focus from someone else because
Possible,
I wasn't, I was a distraction. I wasn't present in their moment, or I wasn't present as a leader in what was going on in the rest of my organization or for my team. I was thinking about myself, or I was thinking about what else was going on in my mind, or what it was going on, perhaps distracted outside of work, or perhaps in this moment, instead of being here now in this conversation, I was distracted by the conversation that took place an hour ago, or that's going to take place an hour from now, right?
Yep. And you sat through a presentation I did a couple of months ago about neuroscience and the effects of neuroscience on business and business analysis and so forth. And one of the key points that an author I drew heavily on in that presentation makes is that external distractions are relatively easy for us to ignore or to set aside. But it's the internal distractions. It's exactly what you just said, the conversation, remembering the conversation that I had that didn't go well, or remembering something I'm supposed to be doing 2 days from now. Those internal distractions create rabbit holes in our brains that neurologically are much more difficult to dismiss and get away from than external distractions. It takes positive energy and mental effort to set those distractions aside.
Yes. Mental energy, positive energy, discipline, process, procedure. Like there's got to be, so you are a process analyst at heart. I know there are ways to do this. One of my recent podcast guests has a procedure that I'm still just so deeply in awe of, that she has a way that she orchestrates her day. so that she doesn't allow any portion of her day to distract her, because she knows at the end of her day she has an anchor that she can go back to and sort of clean up the mess of her day is the best way I can describe it. She has a protected, almost sacred space at the end of her day where she can go back and clean up everything. It is quiet and it is protected, and she goes back through all her meeting notes, and she goes back through her email, and she goes back through everything and clears her action items or sequences her action items and prioritizes the top 3 for tomorrow, and cleans up her desk and leaves today prepared for tomorrow. And this kind of, I don't have to be distracted because I have a space where that chaos is going to get cleaned up.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be distracted because I have a plan on where it's all going to come out okay. That's really, I think that would be a wonderful discipline I don't have it yet, but it sounds like a wonderful discipline.
Sounds pretty good. Yeah.
Right.
Just one more thought about the notion of being present. I found that there was a difference for me between being on stage and being in character, truly being in character. There was, and in fact, really of all the musicals I've been part of, there's really only one where I truly felt from beginning to end that I was that character. And there were several reasons for it. It happened to be a production of The Wizard of Oz, and I was Scarecrow, and my younger daughter was Dorothy. And as you know the story, Dorothy and the Tin Man, Lion, and Scarecrow are on stage together for most of the time. And there's also that moment at the end when she's about to leave Oz and she says goodbye to the lion, and then the Tin Man turns to Scarecrow and says, "And you were my favorite," and tears, not an issue. They were real. Every time, every show. But what was magical about that was several things. I somehow relate to the guy who felt like he needed a brain, even though, I know I have one. But mostly it was that special connection being on stage with my kid, in each of us having, sharing the spotlight, as it were. And that was the time that I really felt like I was Scarecrow. It wasn't a case of me standing there remembering my lines and pretending that I'm somebody else. I really felt like I was. And it was a pretty magical thing. I mean, this was 15 years ago, and I still talk about it with awe in my voice because it was like that.
I can see our guests can't see this, but I can see the sparkle in your eyes. So I wonder, I read something recently about that difference between our work selves and our self selves. And the piece that I was reading was making the case that there shouldn't be such a difference between who we are at work and who we are in real life. And as you're making that case, that you felt this deep connection between yourself and Scarecrow. I mean, not right, because of that connection between you and your daughter. And I don't know, there's something there. I'm having trouble articulating it, but there's something there about it's easier to be present at work when our work selves are our genuine, authentic selves.
Yeah, you're not trying to maintain, if you're not trying to maintain a character at work, if that character is already you, then yeah, it's easier to focus on the things you need to pay attention to rather than pay attention to trying to be something you're not quite.
Yeah, if some portion, and maybe, sure, not every day is going to be filled with everything that we love. I just don't think that's promised to any of us.
Nope.
There are going to be tasks that we don't enjoy, and we're going to slog at some point. But I think if the bulk of our days, or some greater percentage than less, right, more than not, if something about the mission or the vision of the work that we're doing, or the type of work, or the people that we are working with, or the general principles that we're following and the character that we're adhering to is authentic to who we are, maybe that makes it easier to be present.
Yeah.
So moving on, we are getting to 5 things. So we are here. If you're just joining us now, you really are missing the boat here. You got to stop and rewind. For our listeners who just jumped in, we are here with Scott Helmers, and I am just delighting in these things that we have learned. 5 things that he's learned doing musical theater that apply at work. We are learning about the ensemble. We are learning about not to be the director if you're not the director. We're learning about the 30-foot rule and how it applies to more than just set design. We're learning about how critical it is to be present. And now we're on to number 5, improv. A mixed blessing, you say?
Yes, indeed. There is absolutely a time and a place to do things off the cuff, to invent, to create, to make things new. Sometimes that's easier to do when you're alone because your actions don't have direct consequences on others. Sometimes it's part of a team that can brainstorm successfully or create successfully or set aside whatever internal biases they have and just think freely. And quick aside about real improv. So comedy troupes or improv troupes, the classic rule is you never say no. When someone throws a line at you or makes a suggestion or offers a comment, your answer typically should be yes, and not yes, but yes, and because you want to continue the conversation. And in true improv, you don't know where this conversation is going to go. Now, I'm not an improv actor. I know some of what I've just said from a guy we both know, Coop, who is a former improv actor, who's now a frequent speaker at some of the same conferences where Sinikka and I have a tendency to show up. And it's great to know that that sort of thing exists and that there are people who are skilled at doing that. And it's not just random. People practice it sounds oxymoronic, but people practice to be better at improvising.
Mhm.
Well, in theater, if you are supposed to say a certain thing and then another actor uses that as his or her cue to then say something, and there's actual conversation happening, or I say something that is a cue for someone to come in from off stage or to leave the stage, it's kind of necessary that you say the right thing at the right time. There's some value in that. I have been on both ends of the actor or being the actor who said the wrong thing or didn't say the right thing, or heaven forbid, left or didn't show up. So 2 quick stories. I was in a production of a show called My Favorite Year. There was a movie of the same name a number of years ago, too. The plot of the show is not consequential at all. There's a scene, it takes place in front of the curtain. So, if you ever go to a show and you see something that's happening in front of the curtain, it's because there's a really big set change going on behind. And the writers of the show did it in such a way that they could have this small little thing that takes place out front so that the folks doing the work can get the work done behind. Well, this was one of those short scenes. 2 of us came in from stage right, and one of the leads is supposed to come in from stage left. And so we do this crossover, and there's a short conversation, and then we go our separate ways. One evening in particular, the 2 of us came in from stage right, and we stand there for a beat or 2, and I'll call him Bobby, because actually his name is Bobby, doesn't come in from stage left. And so I look at this other person, and we just sort of made up some stuff. And essentially what I did was say what Bobby was supposed to have said, trying to recast it in a way that it would sound like something my character would say rather than what his character was supposed to say. So it worked. And, afterwards, a bunch of people, including Bobby himself, ultimately said, well, thank you. That was great. Thank you for covering. So that's one side of the story. But, being the hero is a nice thing once in a while. There was a production of Peter Pan with a different theater company a few years earlier. And I was one of the pirates. And there was a particular scene where I'm up on what is essentially the deck of the pirate ship. So I'm one story above the stage. And there's a ladder behind the pirate ship that we use to get up and down. And in this particular scene, I was supposed to deliver several lines from above, and there were several pirates down on the ground, on the shore. And we had a little bit of dialogue. And then I was supposed to say one more thing and then leave. And somehow I lost track and thought I'd already said that thing, so I left. The scene wasn't over. The pirates on the shore look up and I'm not there. So they had to do what I had to do for Bobby. Somebody made up something and said something. So there is a time and place for improv, and it's a good thing when you can do it and pull it off. And that's equally true at work. We all, it may not be quite as critical as the spotlight is shining on you and you're supposed to be there and you're not. But on the other hand, there are times when we have to react to unforeseen circumstances, to something that doesn't go even anywhere close to how we planned. And we need to be adaptive. We need to be able to react and react positively. Reacting negatively, getting angry, being bitter, those things don't help. That's the saying no. That's not saying yes and.
Right. Agreed. I think of the countless times that any of us can think of where something didn't go as planned. A delivery didn't arrive, a thing didn't come out of the printer, the person wasn't in the meeting when we expected, the thing wasn't where we expected to do, and we had to roll with it, right?
Yep.
That's where the yes and comes in.
Yeah. One more quick story that somebody reminded me of just a couple of nights ago. I was the house manager for a theater production 6 or 7 years ago. And we had made it through Act 1. We were into Act 2, and the power went out.
Oh, no.
To the entire theater.
Oh, no.
So the emergency lights come on. I came on stage from the wings to say, okay, everybody, please make your way out to the lobby where there's at least still a little bit of fading natural light, and we'll see what's going on. Well, we made some phone calls and found out it wasn't just this school building where we were, it was the entire neighborhood, for several miles around. So it wasn't clear when or how fast this was going to happen. So we're standing around in the lobby, and I'm consulting with the director and the rest of the production team, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And we decided we'd give it X number of minutes, whatever that was, 20 minutes or half an hour, and see what happened. I'm starting to formulate, as the front office manager, I'm starting to formulate ticket refund policy and we're doing this sort of thing on the fly. And we were just about to cancel and reschedule when the lights came back on. No, and by the way, rescheduling is non-trivial because we're renting space in in a school. We can't just come another weekend. So the power comes back on. Well, the other thing to appreciate is this happened to be a show with a massive 2-story house that rotated 180 degrees. So you could see both the front outside of the house and the back inside. During the darkness, we even went so far as to offer anyone who wanted to see how that rotation magically happened to come into the dark, and we lit it with cell phones and showed them how the house rotated, just because we thought that would at least, prevent a few refunds. So ultimately, the power came back on. The cast did a brilliant job of not improvising in this case, but resuming, but picking up where they'd left off 45 minutes earlier. And the show was great.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic. So these are examples where improv went well. But you said it's a mixed blessing. So
Yes.
What's the downside?
The downside can be the guy who doesn't show up on stage and nobody figures out how to cover for it. And there's just this gaping hole. I've certainly seen that happen. We've seen that at work. Somebody who has a responsibility, they're supposed to deliver X by Tuesday afternoon, and they fail to do so, and it has negative consequences on the project. Some, hopefully not fatal, but certainly can be detrimental. So yeah, either failure to improv or improving badly, making a bad choice of how to fill or how to cover something that has happened or didn't happen.
Yep. I would say, as a process analyst at heart, would you say that there are, I'm going to ask a leading question, not sure how you'll answer me here, but are there some processes that have to go a certain way? Are there places where there is rigor, where there is structure,
Sure.
that it's got to go this way or bust?
You mentioned emergency responders earlier, or medical procedures, there are lots of workplaces in which improv can't happen in a very real sense, or if it does, it has to be within a very tight structure.
So if you are going to improvise in those cases, it's within a very narrow set of boundaries or within a set of framework, or certainly at all other costs with clear communication. Like, at least let others know if you're going to go outside those bounds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's actually that's a really good point. If you're in a position where you do have to improvise, whether it's trivial on stage or real life or potentially even life threatening, the communication is key. If you're on stage trying to improvise to cover a gap, there's nonverbal communication that's going to happen to some extent, and you can sometimes use a verbal cue to explain what it is you're about to do or what you've just done in a way that helps the others who are on stage to figure that out. A little bit less critical without a spotlight shining on you at work, perhaps, but nevertheless, the communication part of improvising is critical. So communication around the improvisation, not just the improvisation itself, is likely to breed more success.
Yeah. What a wonderful journey through these ways in which musical theater. So if you've not had the opportunity to be part of musical theater, then some of these ideas may have seemed unfamiliar, but surely you've heard the connection. And if you've not had the chance to witness musical theater, then go find a show somewhere, because there are local troupes and certainly larger performances that absolutely will enrich your life by participating and hearing them. And if you've been part of musical theater, surely you recognize quickly some of the things that Scott has shared here. What a fun journey. Scott, thank you for taking us on this.
Oh, absolutely.
These resonate very, very familiar very quickly. And I see the parallels. Let me ask you, because this wouldn't be the Even Better podcast if I didn't ask, what's making you even better these days?
I will talk briefly about something you and I spoke about just before we started recording, and that is related to music, not theater in this case, but music, and it's playing live music again. I had a somewhat extraordinary experience this past weekend to be part of a brass quintet. I mentioned playing trombone earlier, but I have to say I haven't played in a very long time, and so I got a call 2 weeks ago to say, "Hey Scott, we're missing a trombone player for a brass quintet that's going to play as part of a Christmas concert, and it's in a castle." And just that was almost enough to intrigue me. But I said, okay, it's gonna take me some time to see whether I can even play enough. Substituting in an orchestra or a band, you're one of 30, 40, 50, 60 people. When you're substituting in a brass quintet, you're one of 5. There is nowhere to hide. The spotlight is on you in a sense. So I did prepare. I worked as hard as I could, and I knew I wasn't playing at the level I wanted to. And my mantra was do no harm. There were several sections in some of the songs that I knew I would struggle with. The rapidity of the notes was not at my skill level, or my skill level was not up to the rapidity of the notes in a few cases. So I, play the first and the third and the fifth note, or didn't play that measure at all. But it was a brilliant experience to be part of an ensemble that's that small. It is, as I suggested at the outset or early in this session, it's about 60% listening and 40% playing. It's about how much you can be part of the ensemble and still shine in the moments where you shine, but be the underpinning when that's your role. So it was a wonderful weekend. It was terrifying at times, but performing in this castle on the Massachusetts coast, and it truly is a medieval castle built by an inventor of some renown in this area, apparently years ago. Fabulous experience. So yes, it's made me better.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you. So, Scott, certainly if any of our listeners want to reach out to you, they can connect with us and we will connect them with you. But if they want to reach out to you directly, what is the best way for them to find you?
Sure. Scott at Visio. That's Visio like the Microsoft software. Visio, Visio, not with a Z like the TVs. Scott at visiostepbystep.com is my email. I'm also on Twitter at VisProcess, VIS process.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. It has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for your time today.
It has been for me too. I really appreciate being involved with you in almost any way that's possible. It's just the conversation is wonderful. Thank you, Sinikka.
Right back at you, Scott. It's a joy. And to all of our listeners today, thank you for listening in. And on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.